This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 130.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another video. I have a great guest today, and you might already know him. He is one of the co-founders of the PreSales Collective. His name is James Kaikis, and I wanted to have him on the show so we can discuss how he became a SE leader and why he started the PreSales Collective and why he's doing everything that he's doing. There aren't that many SE resources out there. It's like you can count them on one hand. Beyond the teachers and the gurus like Chris White, amazing resource, but he doesn't have like that the sort of community that the PreSales Collective and I have, along with a few others here that we know about and you've heard guests from. So how about this? Let's just jump into the show and see what James has to say. Oh, I'm going to be on his show. If you're listening to this, I'm going to be on his show the same day. So on Monday, October 12th, this is going to be published on my show, and I'm going to be a guest on his show. So if you want to have a listen to that, listen to some of my stories and why hybrid sales engineering is good or bad, have a listen to that. So let's jump into the show. And good afternoon, James Kaikis. Did I say your last name right?
You did. I was waiting to see if you were going to say it right. You said it right. Thanks, Ramsey.
My pleasure. Well, thanks for coming on. You are kind of famous in the SE world right now. So
I don't know. I don't know if famous is the right word, but I'll take the compliment.
Would you prefer infamous?
Oh man, now we're getting into some deep stuff right here.
You are famous in the SE world. In case people don't know you, can you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So James Kaikis, I am a solutions engineering leader at SalesForce currently. I've spent most of my career in startups at Showpad and Revenate, but most recently I helped co-found the PreSales Collective, first global community, really catered toward the audience. And honestly, Ramsey, people like you were my inspiration. I mean, I started the podcast because you had a podcast, so you're the pioneer. So I'm glad to be here, really from the OG PreSales Podcast.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. The more podcasts there are, the better.
Absolutely.
Because everybody has their style. You can't pull out different information than I can. So I'm happy that there are finally some more resources for sales engineers.
I mean, that's what this whole thing's about, right? So, I commend you, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last couple of months, but like you've been one of the people who've been really doing it for years and pushing it and growing it. And, that's amazing. And everything you've done is great. I always say you're the hardest working guy in pre-sales. And it's great to see this year. I mean, I think, 2, 3, 4 pre-sales type podcasts have all popped up and a couple within the last month or two. And so, it's the rising tide floats all boats and lifts all boats. Yep. So it's all great for all of us,
Yeah. So there are a few, I'll try to list them in the show notes, but about you specifically, not about the PreSales Collective, which we'll talk about that. How did you get into sales engineering? Because I'm looking at your background. I didn't see that path coming. Could you explain that?
I don't know that I saw it either. So my life, my path has been interesting, right? But I think that there's a couple of common themes. I used to work in operations. I worked in athletic and facility and recreation operations, moved to hospitality operations, and really only fell into hospitality for a personal situation that was happening in my life. And so I made the transition to a hospitality technology company, and I was a subject matter expert. I was the SME because I knew the hotel industry inside and out. I was a hotel operations manager. And so when we were selling software to hotels, I could be someone on the phone. I actually worked in post-sales. We didn't have a pre-sales team. I was a customer engagement manager, and I did onboardings and deployments for Europe, Middle East, and Africa out of San Francisco and the West Coast. And I started to learn. I knew about the hotels, and then I started to learn our competitors. And so the sales team would pull me on the big calls and important calls and say, hey, will you talk to this customer about this? Will you talk about the competition? Where you give your hotel lens? Will you give your hotel perspective? And I was like, wow, this sales thing is pretty fun. I'm starting to like this. And so, push comes to shove. I end up creating a pre-sales role at that company. And then I got this offer from what was Showpad just starting in the US. And I was the first SE hire had a team, 2 months later, 3 months later, and helped build that organization over 4 years. So I fell into it, I stumbled into it, but it's something that really aligns with, my values and things that I think that I excel in, and I've really enjoyed it.
Okay. So I like to point out to people who are looking for an SE job, it's usually good to find a job in what you are now a customer of.
Yep.
So
100%.
and that's where you just did that. So what are your, like you just mentioned that it works well for your strengths and all that. What are these strengths that you're just talking about?
Yeah, on the hot seat, right? I think I really care about people, and I really care about customers, and I like to say customer-centric problem solving. And when I reflect back on my career, I think that's what I've always done. I worked in hospitality. I like to say that I have a history of leaving good jobs. I was the first VIP manager for Hyatt Hotels in Hawaii. I created a program that when people came to Hawaii and came to Oahu and Hyatt, I made sure that they had a great vacation. That was my job. Was my job to make sure that they had an excellent stay, excellent time, manage expectations. And so when I kind of went into software, I was like, wow, like I'm trying to make sure that they have a good operational experience because I understand what it's like to work in a hotel. I also understand what it's like to be a consumer. And so for me, if I put that customer centricity at the center of everything that I do, everything else gets a lot easier, right? And like sales just tends to be a part of what I do. I traditionally do enjoy talking. I like giving opinions. I like hearing customers, giving my advice. And so I think that is the core of who I am and why I've really enjoyed this pre-sales role.
Okay. Did you have to deal with pissed off customers as a hotel VIP manager?
Oh man.
How was it? Like I feel like that's a little bit more different. My English is not very best today. Like people come up to you and you're kind of dealing with pissed off customers, whereas as an SE it might be easier. How did it go for you?
Yeah. So even taking a step back, so I used to work on like game day operations and event operations. So I used to manage like basketball tournaments and football tournaments and different things like that. And so, in those situations, you have people that are upset, but they're literally upset about something, but your operation has to continue. And when I moved to Hawaii and I was in that type of role, you have people who've never been to Hawaii. I lived on Oahu specifically. And they spend all their money, they build up this dream vacation, they book something, and then they get there and it's not to their expectation. We were one of the busiest hotels in the entire chain of Hyatt. And so people would book an ocean view to come to Hawaii, and then we actually have to downgrade them because we didn't have the room availability. So could you imagine that? You just took this 5-hour flight, 10-hour flight, 15-hour flight. You're on vacation, you finally get to Hawaii, and expectations aren't what you thought that they are. And that was tough, right? But like, I feel like leading with empathy, right, is something that people talk about now, but just like understanding and hearing people out, like they want to vent. So I think I learned that pretty quickly and pretty early. And like how that translates to pre-sales, in my opinion, is that like you can kind of pick out how people are feeling. It's a little bit harder in virtual now, but like in a customer call, right? I can be like, all right, that doesn't feel right. That's not resonating right. I heard the way you responded there. I need to figure that out, right? I might need to either come back to that or I might need to attack it later. So like that whole like human element of things is something that I learned in the hospitality business.
That's awesome. Do you feel like you're in a bit more control right now in terms of the product versus as a VIP man? You are. That's not what I saw. How is that? That's not what I thought. How are you in more control right now?
I think I'm a little bit of a control freak when it comes to like being in my pre-sale role.
I could not tell that.
Can't tell, Ramsey, about all the questions I asked you prior to getting on here, right?
Yep.
I think for me, like like you control the controllables. Things are going to happen. What can go wrong will go wrong. But I feel like in software, at least, I can make sure that we're tight, we're buttoned up. We've done our due diligence. We've prepared. We know what we can do going into that situation. And you can only do what you can do. But the more you prepare, the more you might be, how do I want to say it? You might be able to handle the unexpected, right? And calls will go wrong. In sales, generally, you could check every box and a deal doesn't close. You might check 0 boxes and a deal closes. And I think that's the beauty of the situation. But for me, I do feel like I'm in a little bit more control of what I can provide, right? What I can bring to the table at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's why I like to always talk about practice. Sales engineering is a sport, right?
It is. You're right.
And I used to be a basketball player. You couldn't tell right now, but I used to be a basketball player, and we just practice free throws. We practice layups so that when we're in the middle of a game and we're doing a layup and someone tries to block it, I have the skills to try something different.
Right.
Which if you don't practice doing layups from the get-go, you're not even going to do that.
Exactly.
So
It becomes muscle memory. And I like your basketball analogy there. I think there's the 5 Ps, like proper preparation, performance. I apologize. I'm not going to get that one right. But like the more you put into the practice, there's a reason professional sports teams practice. Musicians practice. Famous movie stars practice. It does show on the end product.
Yeah. And sales engineering tend to skip the practice and go straight to perform.
Sometimes it's tough. It's just the world we live in, right?
Yeah. Well, like for all professional sports, they have time set aside for practice. Whereas sales engineers, if your calendar is empty, your salesperson just booked over something so you can go perform. So,
right.
Yeah. Which is why you need to manage your calendar better. Now, how did you find going from, working at a hotel where the technology wasn't like you had to know how to use the technology, but you didn't have to sell it, to learning a technology from scratch? Like, did you learn how to code, or did you learn any technical skills
not necessarily hands on the keyboard? I mean, I've understood core foundations, and I like to think I'm a technologist generally. Like, I like to tinker and figure out how things work and understand the ins and outs. And I think that's why I had a good I'm very curious, right? I had a good transition because I just really wanted to know everything. And I learned our product inside and out. I learned the competitive products inside and out. So I became that expert. So, that helped with my foundation generally, but you're right. But I will say, I never planned on being in hospitality. I never planned on being in operations. There's just some life things that led me to that path. And I think that's why at some point I was like, all right, it's time to go see what I can do. And I went to the technology field and had a bit of an adjustment for sure at first, but it's all been great.
Nice. I was talking to someone on the podcast a couple of weeks back where they had their entire career planned out. It didn't always go as they planned, but they had it planned out. And it seems like you and me are kind of alike, where I didn't plan to go into sales engineering. I didn't plan to, go in support. Right. It's the first job that I found, whatever. So I guess there are multiple ways to get to what you want, even if you don't know you want it.
Yeah. And like what you might kind of mentioned earlier, it's like subject matter expertise are transferable skills. Like I talk to people who want to get in pre-sales all the time. I'm sure you do too. And it's like, what are your transferable skills? And figure out what those are and what you're currently doing when you try to make a career change. Because some of those things, like the soft skills of pre-sales, I've talked to a couple people who run academies, and like they're talking to people who just come out of college. These individuals don't have any, real life experiences, or professional experiences, I should say, are very minimal, but they're looking for things like empathy and curiosity and those types of things. And those are things that people should latch onto when they want to make a career shift.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so you went from individual contributor and you built your own team as a manager of sales engineering. Yeah. And at a startup, I'm assuming. So
yep, at a startup.
How was that experience?
Well, this is the funny thing about this is that I've been in a managing people role for quite some time, since I was fairly at a young age. And even in the hotel operations or even game day operations, you're in charge of 40, 50, 60, 100 people at a time. But what was so different is like those were just machines, right? You had to make sure the machine ran, and you had to make small tweaks and tinker here and there, make adjustments on the fly, but it was a machine that always went. And the biggest adjustment was going to software and having like a 2-person team and being like, wow, we're a small team and it's not like an operation, and getting to know the people, getting to know the process different, building culture. That was definitely an adjustment for me. I mean, absolutely. But I've always enjoyed, having the accountability of people working for me. It's just something that for whatever reason is just inherent within me.
Okay. You don't have to do this, but I would like for you to close your eyes.
Okay.
And
I'm on camera, so you're going to see this. So.
Well, I'll turn off my camera. Don't worry. Just if one of your employees were come to tell you your best trait is this, what would it be? You can open your eyes now.
Empowering my employees.
How do you do that?
I literally take myself out of situations and put them in them, and I prepare them as much as possible. Because to me, I look at people in my career who've helped me get to where I'm at, and they believed in me. They empowered me. They let me make decisions. They let me make mistakes. And so I think about that with my employees, and there are times that I can solve these problems myself, but I don't want to, right? It doesn't help me out. And if I can help them grow and reach to their potential and do something that they didn't think that they could do, that's huge, right? And that's my favorite part about people leadership at the end of the day.
Is there a common problem that your employees tend to need you to empower them to solve?
I think it's tough conversations generally, right? Like tough conversations, giving feedback. People really do struggle. Excuse me. People really do struggle having to be like, hey, like that didn't go well. You didn't do this right. I didn't do this right. And getting into it. And I think it's harder to do, amongst peers for sure. And I think those are the types of situations I really do spend a lot of time with my team on.
So as in like SE sales teams, or just within the SE team themselves?
I mean, it can be within the SE team, like personality conflicts, but excuse me, I would say most times it's like conflict resolution between an AE and an SE, right? AE has a situation, they've handled it a certain way, and for whatever reason, it didn't go well. It rubbed the SE the wrong way. It was just wrong, right? So having to approach them and tell them that is tough. Or SE between SE, right? Like at SalesForce, I manage a core team, so we're responsible for our sales and service products, but we work with specialists. And so specialists could be B2B commerce or the platform team or a CPQ team, right? And giving your peers direct feedback about a demo or about the way they approach the value proposition can be difficult. So I think that's where I spend a lot of time personally.
Oh, yeah. There's a situation that happened to me. It was early on in my career. I did something not to the best of my abilities. I admit that, or I didn't know I'm supposed to do it one way versus another, whatever it was. And instead of the person telling it to me directly, he went and told the salesperson, who went then and told the director, who then told the VP of sales engineer, who then told my manager, who then came and told me. And then I immediately, I got up from my like I told my manager, hold on. And I walked out and went straight to that guy's office because I knew we were in the same building.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I didn't like it that you did that. Is that it? It's like, yeah, it's not a big deal. I'm like, all right, well,
right.
Everybody knows about it now. Thanks for that.
That's the worst. That is the worst.
But the good thing about that is the next time, like I knew the next time something would happen, he would come and talk to me, and we never had that. Like it wasn't even remotely a big deal, but just going the way around, it's always easier to talk to that person directly.
It is. And like the game of telephone is hard. And what I always say is like the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? If I were to go to my SE and ask about the situation, and I would go to the AE and ask about the situation, and I'd maybe go to the sales leader and ask about the situation, the answer is somewhere in the middle ground of that. And I just want my team to handle the situation head on themselves because there's no game of telephone.
So why is it you think that people are not doing that initially?
I think people are afraid to give feedback generally. Someone's afraid to tell somebody something negative, right? Like there's a book called Essentialism, and the idea behind essentialism is focusing in this book is focusing on the things that actually matter, right? And avoid the distractions. And so for instance, in this book, it talks about when somebody asks you to do something and you say yes and you never end up doing it, people will have a negative view on you versus you just saying no up front. And sometimes saying no up front is really hard to do. And it makes people feel uncomfortable because you want to be nice. You want to be collaborative. You want to be working well together. But that idea of saying no up front is hard, but it's actually the right thing to do in the long run. People will perceive you differently. And so, also I've had this conversation with someone that well, Brian Mazzaferri, right? Brian Mazzaferri and I have gotten to know each other really well. And he's like, hey, you have to have a culture of feedback. You have to have openness to have this feedback. And that comes organizationally, right? That's culturally and organizationally. And what happens many times is people say, all right, that didn't go well. That kind of sucked. I didn't really work with this person that much, so I'm just not going to say anything. We're going to move on. And that is not the right approach, in my opinion. I've always found that people will appreciate honesty and truthfulness in a situation because everyone's trying to get better. Nobody walks into work and says, you know what, I really want to be a D- player today. I really want to be a D+ and not do a good job. We're all on the same team when you work in the same company, trying to do the same things, accomplishing the same goals, and we should be collaborating and working together.
100%. And it's also a perception. Like,
yeah, for sure.
There's this, we have a principal SE within our company. Like, so, junior, senior, principal, highest level of SEs, at least within our company. And I always thought of him as not wanting to take feedback or whatever. But now I haven't had the chance to interact with them much.
Yeah.
So I haven't had any feedback really. But now we've been talking quite a bit and the guy is open for feedback. Like he's asking for it. Yep. And you wouldn't get to be a principal without wanting to be feedback.
That's exactly it, Ramsey.
So there is a perception of like, oh, this guy is so high up there, I can't tell him anything. Whereas in fact, the higher you get, in some cases, the more they want feedback.
Yeah. Well, just to add on to that point, I think that's why sometimes you have like the yes man, the yes woman type comment, right? It's like some people don't think that their leaders need to know the reality of the situation. So they just say yes. They just kind of shrug their shoulders and move on. Like it's a lot harder to be like, hey, Ramsey, I don't think that went well versus just saying, yeah, good job. It's much harder, right? And people don't want that friction. So I think you bring up a really good point because I think some of the people who do really well and excel are the ones who take in the feedback, who absorb it and figure out how they can transform themselves to be a better version of themselves at all times.
So speaking of getting better, talk to me about the PreSales Collective. Why did you start it?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. So a little bit of the genesis is that when I lived in San Francisco and I got into pre-sales, I have never had a pre-sale leader in my entire career. I have always reported to a president, a founder, a CRO, a VP of sales, director of sales. I had never reported to an actual pre-sales leader. So I really leaned into the San Francisco group and got to know a lot of people. I mean, I remember showing up to an event, there's 115, 130 people there. I was like, this is incredible. So I grew my network. I had found mentors. I connected with peers. And that's how I grew my pre-sales career. And when I was moving to Chicago with Showpad, I was like, you know what? Chicago doesn't have a pre-sales group. So I should start this. I should take this over. And so we started that group. And then Yuji Higashi and I, who've known each other for years, he's the other co-founder of PreSales Collective, we were talking and we're like, hey, if there's not many resources for pre-sales people. And again, as I mentioned to you, we have, we the sales engineers, there are the people like Peter Cohen and John Kerr and Bob Reinsfeld, Chris White, et cetera, right? But there wasn't a singular place that you would go to learn more at all times. And what we realized is if you're not in that city, what are you going to do? And there's only like 5 cities. And so we decided to create an online group with the idea of having an event at the end of this year. And then lo and behold, COVID happened. Yep. And we decided, hey, you know what? Let's just do this thing. We were going to do it in May or June. We decided to do it in early April, kind of jump off the cliff from a content perspective, put out blogs every week, webinars every week, based off, the podcast and some of the other feedback, the Slack community. We just decided to go, and we've realized that there is a massive appetite, as you know, for pre-sales people coming together. And it's been awesome to see. It's been awesome to connect and get to know people like yourself, because the pre-sales community is an underserved profession generally. And I think as technology continues to change, we need to be able to be on the forefront of adapting to that change and helping make sure that we do have that seat at the table.
Right. And you guys are kind of doing something special right now. So this episode will not show until after you've done your fair, but you're doing other things as well to help people with COVID as well. So can you just explain a little bit more?
Yeah. And I appreciate you helping out as well, because what we're trying to do is, a lot of people have lost their jobs during COVID, and this is a tough time. And, there are plenty of companies that are still hiring. And so we started a job board and started a Slack and really focused on the jobs channel. And what we've seen is people, yourself, Vic, Charlie, just reaching out, finding roles and posting them in the Slack, finding individuals have been affected and trying to put them at the forefront and say, hey, like there's a community that will support you. And we've seen so much progress from that. And we have a lot of leaders that are in the Presales Collective. Charlie Guerrera is leading a event in September, right? Which will have already happened times this air, where we have over 20 plus hiring managers that can make decisions on pre-sales folks. And so we're collecting resumes, we're collecting interested people, and we're just matching them together, right? And that could go through the regular process of applying on a website and going into the ATS and doing referral, but we all know that doesn't necessarily work. So I think it's been great to have the community come together to help each other out. Like the initiatives that you're doing, No IC Left Behind, fantastic, phenomenal, putting exposure out there, putting people out there. It's been awesome to see everybody come together to help each other out.
It is strange how the SE community works together. It's like we're lone wolves who enjoy the pack, which is like an oxymoron, I think.
I like it.
I am immigrant, so I don't know if that was right. But like we kind of want to do our own thing, but we want to do it when we want to help each other out. So it's great to see that happening. It is time to move on to the not so fire round. And these are the same 4 questions I asked the same all my guests.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can take your time answering them because there is no clock behind it anyways.
All right.
The not so fire round. All right. So what is it that you love about sales engineering?
I love seeing a customer's lights turn on when you're in a product demo or demonstration. That just, oh my gosh, this is going to make my life better. That's what this job's all about. Nice.
And you're working for SalesForce, right?
Correct.
You must see a lot of that because SalesForce is kind of everybody uses it. So you solve a lot of problems. So
it's pretty nice.
Yeah. All right. So and the funny part is you can sell to competitors because I worked for 2 competitors right now and they both use Salesforce. And all right. If there's one thing you would change about the role of sales engineering, what would it be?
This might be an interesting response, but the compensation component of it, specifically around spiffs, I think it's completely unfair that a lot of companies will do these major. I get the reps are carrying the quotas, right? They have the stress, the pressure, they got to close the deals. But when you see companies that are doing like 2 or 3 times spiffs, these people are making 5, 8, over 7 figures, right? And the SEs don't even get $1,000 for getting a competitive win. There's an issue there.
My biggest problem with spiffs is that it kind of entices the salespeople to start doing more meetings about those products. We'll talk about that in a sec. And that means that there's more work for me to show those products, even if the customer will not buy. It's just let's throw it and see what sticks. But could you explain what spiffs are? Or what?
So and let me explain too, is that a spiff is a bonus for some sort of achievement, honestly. So how I look at it is if it needs to be SE related spiffs. And I think that's why it doesn't really happen because they're hard, right? You might have like a multiplier if you sell a certain product or you hit your quota. But for the SE, it's like, all right, it was a competitive win against this competitor, you should get $1,000, right? Or if you're in mid-market and your annual contract value per year is $50,000 and you sell a deal that's 3 times that, there should be a spiff there, right? Or, some sort of bonus that is tied to not your direct job. So I know I went through like my explanation. I hope that answered the question. But in my mind, there's SE related spiffs that are a little bit different than the sales comp structure that reward the people that are kind of in the trenches just as much, but on a different spectrum than the account executives who do carry the quotas.
How do you feel about spiffs that are based on internal work or work done within the company to promote other sales engineers?
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen the, typically classified as MBOs. And what I've seen though with MBOs is a lot of times they're part of the overall comp structure. Like I look at this as something that's above and beyond, right? So if I made $100,000 a year and 70% was to my base and 30% was to my variable, sometimes of that 30%, there might be a 10% MBO or a 50% MBO. I'd like to see it be outside of the realm. So like to your internal spiff, you run an internal program, it's almost like a spot bonus. Your manager has a budget to be able to give people a spot bonus for going above and beyond the typical day to day.
Right. Yeah, that's perfect. All right. Question number 3. Other than the Presales Collective and we the SEs, obviously, is there a book or resource that you would recommend for sales engineers?
I am going to grab, I don't know if my virtual background is going to show it, but I'm actually reading this Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder from Garen Hess. I actually read it in 2 days. The idea of understanding your buyers and the buyer's perspective is just critical for pre-sales people. Like I've already said it 100 times, and people who listen to my stuff are probably tired of me saying it, but like this customer centric approach is the future. B2C companies like Netflix and Amazon and the internet generally are changing the way that people buy software. And you have to understand that. So our buyers are changing, but our company's changing, and is our sales approach changing? And I don't know that it's happening everywhere. And so books like this are just get you in the mind of the buyer that allows you as a pre-sales professional to be able to tailor your approach differently, yet keep it in the same context and framework of what your organization wants you to do.
Nice. So like, here's a question that's not related to the not so fire round. SalesForce is a behemoth of a company.
It is.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that when you're working for a company that already has its customers, it's kind of hard to grow because you already have everything. How is it that you manage to continue growing or continue keeping things interesting while working for such a big company?
Yeah. And it's a great question. I think my perspective of SalesForce is a little bit different than others because I am in the manufacturing vertical, which is a brand new vertical, right? Okay. It is literally, SalesForce is known for, they have retail, they have healthcare, life sciences, consumer goods, now manufacturing is one of them. So although we have all the resources and we have the structure, SalesForce generally, and manufacturing generally has not much penetration and has historically not had as much market penetration. So we are actually doing a lot of new logo comparative to the rest of the business. Okay. And it's great because we're working with a lot of customers that are still running their businesses on spreadsheet and software that's like 30 to 40 years old. So for me, it still gives me the startup vibe because we're working on projects that are foundational projects that the rest of Salesforce probably already has. So for me, that's why I stay motivated in a big company in this realm because it is different for sure.
Okay, awesome. Last question of the not so fire round. In your opinion, what separates great sales engineers from the okay or not so good ones?
Curiosity. I think people who, let me take a step back. I didn't do a lot of disco as a pre-sales person in my career, right? Salesforce is definitely more disco heavy. But for me, I would get into the calls. I'd have to do a demo. I'd have to learn about these customers. So I would look at notes. I would look at their website. I would read press releases. I would go on LinkedIn and try to understand the people that I'm talking to so that I can cater and tailor my message. Because it'd be easy for me to say like putting your customer at the center or making sure you sell value. But in reality, it's the step behind that around curiosity and understanding what you're going to be able to present and how you're going to present it and why you're going to present it, because that curiosity is the separation of a good experience versus a great experience, in my opinion.
How do you be curious and ask your questions? I feel like we need a topic for a different podcast, but how do you do that without interrogating the customer?
Yeah, well, that's always the hardest part, right? So I think that when you have disco, generally, you have to understand what you need to get out of that first or second call to understand. Right. But at the same time, depending on what you've heard from the first level of requirements, maybe you go and do a demonstration. You have to ask some questions in that demo, You got to have to weave them in to make it more interactive, to understand. And what I really appreciate and what I think some really great SEs do is build a little bit of a business relationship with a technical person, and they go and have one-on-one conversations or, two-on-one conversations and get to know those people behind the scenes. Because once you get to know them and understand, how they're paid, how they're comped, how they're promoted, how their system works, what actually works with their system and what doesn't work with this. We focus so much on what doesn't work and don't focus enough on what does work. And when you understand all of that together, you can move forward on moving, a deal. But I will say, if you're in a transactional sale, it's a one call deal, one sale deal, your approach is going to be a little bit different than the multi touch point meetings that many software providers have to go through.
Makes sense. Yeah. Building relationships has been very useful for me, at least in my industry.
Yeah.
So
can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you do that? How do you ensure you're building quality relationships, especially in the way that you sell?
Well, you mentioned earlier, have empathy, try to understand.
Yeah.
And right now it's like a buzzword. Empathy is a buzzword. I have a rant I put a rant on YouTube or LinkedIn about having empathy right now. Where has empathy been since you started your career? Yeah. Empathy should have always been there. Mm-hmm. My customers know that I care about them. My customers know that if something is not going to be for their benefit, I'm going to tell them don't buy it, whether my sales guy likes it or not. So that has built trust between me and them. And unlike you, I don't have new logos. I have the same customers, which allows me to go back and have access to the building. So that helps quite a bit.
That does. That's good.
Yeah. It's just, I like to joke around too. That usually helps break the ice and allow me to build a relationship. That's
awesome.
Yeah. I know you can tell that I'm very funny because I'm laughing all the time right now. All right, man. This has been awesome. Last question of the day.
Sure.
Where can people find out more about PreSales Collective, about you personally? And any other links that you want to plug?
I really appreciate that, Ramsey. PreSalesCollective.com. Also LinkedIn. So if you go linkedin.com/company/PreSales Collective, I live on that. I say it's my only social media that I actually use is LinkedIn. Again, James Kaikis, Kaikis. Find me on LinkedIn. If you want to join the PreSales Collective Slack, shoot me a message. I'm always on. Love getting to know people. Love hearing feedback. It's what it's all about. It's just connecting and meeting people. And Ramsey, I really appreciate you having me on. It's great getting to know you. I can't wait to have you on my podcast. And, I appreciate everything that you do and all the effort that you put into the community. It's awesome to see. And you got to feel pretty good about everything that you've done over the last couple of years to see where this profession is going in 2020 and beyond.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And looking forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely. All right, Ramsey. Thanks for the time, man.
My pleasure. All right, this is it. Thanks, James. Thanks, James, for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was fun talking to you. It's always fun talking sales engineering and talking to someone who thinks kind of in similar veins as I think, who want to start a community and launch it and, provide a service or help for other SEs. There aren't that many out there, as I mentioned in the intro, so I'm not going to repeat that. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, I am requesting that you leave a rating and review on whatever platform that you use to listen to this podcast, whether it's iTunes, Apple Play, Google Play, wherever you listen to this. I would really appreciate that. It will show people that this is a valid show, and with 130 episodes, I hope that it is. And if you've been listening to 130 episodes and you haven't left a rating and review yet, well, consider it a favor to me. So I will see you guys next time. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.